Today's guests are Duncan Dickson and Brian Moore. We join their conversation in the faculty lounge.
The good news is that all our grads get jobs.
Right.
So that's,
yeah.
I mean, that's the nice thing about
exactly
what we do, and we're providing a lot of management talent for the hospitality industry, not just in Orlando, but all over the world, really.
Definitely. Yeah.
We have graduates in China, we have graduates in Europe, and we've only been a college since really, we became a department in 2001. And became a college in 2004.
You were there at the beginning then?
We were a department within the College of Business.
Okay.
And then we became a school in 2001.
Okay.
And then moved to become a college of our own in 2004. But we've been a department, I guess, the Dick Pope Institute began in 1979. And then we became a department, I guess, in 1983. Started actually teaching hospitality courses.
Okay.
And bounced between business and a couple other colleges. And then in 2001, we became an independent school and left the College of Business with about 70 majors and grown to 2,200 in 6 years.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty phenomenal growth.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
I think it's probably completely different than the math department because, I mean, it's a pretty big department. There's like 35 faculty, but the reason there's a lot of students is because they all have to come from other places to take math classes. There's not that many
but you don't have that many math majors,
right?
do you?
You have a lot of people that are just there for hospitality. So
most of ours are,
that's
they're
what
purely
they do.
hospitality majors.
Yeah.
And then we have a lot of minors as well. So we still teach 10 to 15 sections a semester on main campus.
Okay.
For our minors.
Right.
So we have a lot of.
So what courses
minors.
do you teach?
Personally?
Yeah.
Well, I'm in the tourism events and attractions department.
Okay.
And because of my Disney experience, I teach a lot of the theme park courses because we can, within our we have 3 degree programs. We have a degree in hospitality management, we have a degree in event management, and we have a degree in restaurant management. So we have 3 BS degrees, within the college. And, within the general hospitality, we have different tracks, they're not really majors, but they're concentrations, if you will, in a certain area. And, one of them is theme parks.
Okay.
So I teach, theme park classes, mostly the upper level theme park classes.
So it's
the electives.
How to build a better roller coaster.
No, we're not. We're not doing the engineering
Okay.
side. We're not building. How to run a better.
Right.
Operation really.
Okay.
We're taking the operational look at, how to provide better guest service.
Definitely.
How queuing theory. How to manage the queues better.
Yeah. Good point.
Doing that sort of thing.
That just reminded me. I have these friends in England when we lived there, and they came to Orlando for Disney. And I remember the one thing that they commented about over and over again was how when they were at Disney, they would stand in line, but it never felt like they were standing in line. It felt like it was just always stuff going on, and they were entertained, and they felt like the lines just lasted. They're through it in no time.
How do you make an hour-and-a-half line feel like it's 15 minutes?
Exactly.
So that's what we try and we work on that, and we work on the benefits of things like Fast Pass, virtual queuing, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So I had articles published on virtual queuing,
which is just setting up I guess a computer simulation of what this is like, or
no. Virtual queuing is standing in line without having to stand in line.
Oh.
So if I walk up to Space Mountain, and the wait at Space Mountain is an hour and a half, am I better off having the guests physically stand in that line for an hour and a half, or am I better off giving them a ticket that says you can come back in an hour and a half and go straight on the ride?
Okay.
Well, wouldn't you rather have them out spending money in your shops and in your restaurants than standing there in the line?
Good
so
point, yeah.
you know, you give them, hate to say a reservation, but you give them a fast, what we call a fast pass, or Universal would call it a Universal Express ticket, to come back in that hour and a half, and within 10 minutes you're guaranteed of being on the attraction.
Okay.
So you know, you're in a virtual queue,
right,
if you will.
Well, yeah, there's some interesting ideas there, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and you know, we hire mathematicians to, you know, solve the you know, the equations to figure out, you know how many fast passes and, you know, what the permutations are. If we give out, you know, a fast pass at this time, you know, how many, you know, all those. But we hire those people to do that for us.
Right.
Yeah. So we teach our students to hire smart folks to come in and do that.
Okay.
You know, to do the and we, you know, teach them to work with industrial engineers and, you know, people like that to solve those kinds of issues. You know, what's the maximum capacity of the monorail? You know, how many people can we put on a monorail? You know, we have a backup on the monorail. And one of the classic studies that was done by a guy named Bruce Laval, who vice president of Disney. You know, problem with the monorail, guest satisfaction of the monorail. You know, can't get on the monorail, and the immediate was action. Well, let's put more monorail trains on the beam. Well, mathematically,
think about that a little.
That doesn't work. You know, intuitively, it's that, well, we put more on, we'll be able to handle more guests. But with, you know, the stops, the automatic stops that you have to create for safety, it actually slows up the monorail system as opposed to speeds it up.
Oh, right.
And, you know, so, you know, it wasn't putting more trains on actually fewer trains speeds it up.
Interesting.
And so it's maximization, redesigning the car so you can get more people in the car as opposed to adding more trains to the beam.
Right.
So, I mean, so we deal with things like that.
Yeah.
You know, we deal a lot with safety, you know, because, you know, in our business we can kill people.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
you know, so we have to, you know, whether it's food sanitation, whether it's ride safety, hotel safety, you know, we have to deal with that. I also teach human resources classes, human resource management, communications classes, and then guest service management. Okay. So those are probably my.
So are there graduate courses offered by the college too?
Absolutely, we have a full master's program.
Okay.
Master of Science and a Ph.D. program.
There's a Ph.D. So this is what I'm curious about, because as I hear you talk, there's a lot of ideas that come about, and I mean, to have original ideas about how to solve these kind of problems in this industry, I guess this would be Ph.D. work to do this.
Yeah, a lot of it would be, you know, Ph.D. work. Yeah, I've got a couple of Ph.D. students now working on a role ambiguity study. You know, we're well, in the hospitality industry, you have a lot of employees who really aren't paid by the company; they're paid by the guest. Your tipped employees. Right. So you know, their roles are kind of ambiguous. You know, bring me an English teacher. Ambiguous because, you know, I work for XYZ hotel company, but my monetary compensation comes from the guest. So do I do what the guest wants me to and violate company policy, or do I adhere to company policy and make the guest mad and maybe not get my gratuity? Right. So, I mean, so there's a lot of issues there about, you know, what's the behavior, how do we get them to adhere to, you know, the guidelines of the company and not, you know, go where the money is.
Okay. Yeah, I see the problem. You know, so what are some ideas about?
Well, we're just investigating, you know, now in terms of, you know, how often does this behavior occur? Okay. Right. You know, is this, you know, anecdotally, you know, getting bellmen and valet parkers and bartenders and people like that to talk to you is difficult. Sure. You know? But, you know, most of us have been working in the industry for a long time, and you hear the stories, and you know there's the issue, but trying to quantify it
is difficult.
Is sometimes difficult.
So you're doing some statistical work to
well, we're trying to gather
out?
data now.
Yeah. Okay.
On bellman behavior and bartender behavior, in terms of role ambiguity and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So working on that.
You said you have
we
two
call it
PhDs.
the Janus effect.
Janus.
Janet, the two-headed god of Roman mythology.
Okay.
Looking both ways.
Oh, I see. Okay. Gemini, isn't it?
Janus.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah. Gemini is the twins.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Janus is the two-headed door god of Greek mythology, or Roman mythology, excuse me.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Not that familiar. I know Bacchus.
Well, see, Bacchus is the god of hospitality.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's
we
right.
talk about Bacchus all the time.
He'd be a very important one.
He's one of our big boys.
That's right.
Yeah. We have a Bacchus Bash every spring.
Do you really?
Yeah. CF Central Florida Hotel and Lodging Association.
Okay.
Has this thing called the Bacchus Bash.
Right.
And all the proceeds, all the local hotels have exhibits, and we sell tickets, and CFHLA sells tickets and raises money for hospitality scholarships.
Okay.
Yeah, so we use that to raise funds for students, locally. So, we get a great deal of wonderful industry support from our local industry to support our endeavors. And CFHLA is a big supporter of ours. The local hotel companies, of course, Rosen, Harris Rosen gave us the seed money to build the college and the land to put the college on.
Okay.
So, we get a lot of, and that's one reason we're located where we are down in the I-Drive corridor, because we're close to our industry. Being up on
that makes sense.
Main campus,
Sure.
we were so far away from the industry, it was really tough for us.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So we have a nice little corner of the world.
Yeah.
Staked out.
So I'm still wondering about these. I'm really interested in these ideas and the PhDs. So I guess the idea now is to say with your students that you go look at the problem for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And after you've looked at it for a while, then hopefully once you really understand the problem, then you'll have some idea about how to solve it, or eventually just an idea will come to you about how to fix the problem, if there is a problem.
Yeah, well, a lot of times, in an industry, in the heat of battle, you're so close to it, it's hard to see it.
Right.
So the doc students can, kind of be a little bit detached and, take a 20,000-foot view as opposed to, being at 100 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And, so they have a little bit of a detachment.
Okay.
One of the things that, I'm looking at, and I've got a number of articles on, is alignment. We have, most all of our companies have mission statements. And, the mission statement is this wonderful, thing about how we're supposed to act and what we're supposed to do and everything.
Sure.
And then it hangs on the wall and nobody ever looks at it. And, if we're truly aligned, our daily practices and our policies and our procedures align with the mission statement.
Right.
And we did a study, and we're doing another one with my graduate research assistant on job advertisements. And we took a look at hospitality companies that were advertising for managers. Mm-hmm. And we looked at a number of job advertisements, and only 2 companies out of, I think, about 250 did they even talk about their mission statement, their job advertisement.
Interesting.
So are we giving applicants the wrong message, about what we want versus what we say we want?
Yeah.
And do we do that constantly in what we reward, what we measure our performance on? How often do the performance reviews reflect the mission statement?
Right.
Do you get measured on this mission statement?
Right.
And the initial research is we're not real good at alignment.
Okay.
And things would be a little bit better if we were less financially focused and more focused on what our mission is.
Yeah, right.
This is what we say we want to do, but we don't reward anybody for doing it.
Right.
You get rewarded only on the financials.
Right.
And,
yeah, that's a very good point, actually. Yeah.
And turnover's, a good example. Most of the hospitality industry has horrible retention. People come and go. They don't leave the industry; they leave companies. They come and go. But nobody's ever held accountable.
Okay.
And working with a restaurant company, had horrible management retention, and they were losing 35–40% of their managers every year. Which is
it's a lot.
It's a lot, and it creates issues. Yet nobody was ever held accountable for that. And my question was, well, if you lose, 50 pounds of steak, what happens to the manager? Oh, there's a big investigation. There's problems. Well, if you lose a manager, well, that happens.
That's right, yeah.
Well, then, wait a minute.
Maybe not.
It doesn't.
Such a good way, yeah.
Once you hold people accountable, well, and there's from the West out in Las Vegas, there's a HR manager, the vice president of human resources for the old Bellagio and the Steve Wynn organization, a guy named Artie Nathan, was famous for every time an employee left a department, he'd send that department a bill for the replacement cost for the employee and charge their financials. It's amazing how people all of a sudden they're wait a minute, you're going to charge me $2,000 for a housekeeper?
Right.
Well, that's what it cost me to recruit a housekeeper, so yeah. And all of a sudden, so the department's being, charged, and all of a sudden, people start, well, maybe we need to work with Sally a little bit more.
Yeah.
And turns people around.
Yeah.
So we have to quit looking at people as disposables and, thinking of them as assets.
Right.
And so, we try and work on, people as a top asset and,
sure.
and that kind of thing.
Okay.
So
this is some of the research that you've done. Okay.
Not quite as, fancy as you, but
well, it's no less important. I mean,
well, I think so, but
I don't know. I don't think it is. I mean, we need all of this stuff to make it all work together and.
Absolutely. Oh, that's what I think.
I mean,
we need to have all.
Mathematicians need to go on vacation too, and so. Yeah.
Do mathematicians actually take vacations?
Well, sometimes,
Okay.
So,
come visit our resorts and our hotels.
Okay.
But as the baby boomers start to retire, our industry is going to be that much more, important because they're retiring, better health, much more disposable income, so they're able to travel. So we need to be able to provide. We're one of the fastest growing industries in the world.
Right.
Orlando, I think in a Forbes magazine article this week, was #1 city in the United States for job creation.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they expect, I think,
my goodness,
probably quoting this wrong, but I think it was 6.8% job growth, in Orlando.
That's phenomenal, yeah.
And, Las Vegas was at like 4.4% or something.
Wow.
So, we're moving up, we're there, and so we have to, find these people. Right now, unemployment's at an all-time low in Orlando. It's hard to staff these places.
Yeah.
So we have to teach our managers to hang on to their talent and work with the talent and make them stronger.
Yeah, I see what you mean. That's definitely a complicated problem to tackle. So.
So. And when you're working with human behavior, it's even
that's
worse.
That's much harder than anything I've ever had to do. I think, yeah.
Well, it's I think there are a lot more permutations when you're dealing with humans.
That's right. Yeah.
A lot more. And it's one thing when you're in product management. Working for Ford or General Electric and creating a product. But when because then you have employee and you have management. But when you throw that guest in there. It just creates a whole new dynamic. And because you never know what the guest is going to. And the funny thing about guests is they never want to follow your your rules. You know, they're always special, which they are. They're all special.
Yeah.
So, you know, we have to understand how to make the guests feel special, and yet accomplish what we need to accomplish. So, you know, lots of issues there.
Yeah. So how do you do that then?
You listen a lot.
Okay. Yeah,
You
that's a
listen
good point. Yeah. The customer's always right, I guess. You know?
No, the customer's not always right.
Okay.
You know, the customer's not always right. The customer quite often is wrong.
Okay.
But you have to allow them to be wrong with dignity.
That's why you said you have to listen. Yeah.
You have to listen.
Yeah.
And listen and listen and figure out a different way to, you know, allow them to get what they want.
Right.
You know, and you know, I don't like to teach the customer's always right, because that makes your employee wrong.
Yeah. And
your employee's just doing what you've asked them to do. So, you know, you have to create a point in there where the employee feels like they've done a good job, yet the guest feels like they've been satisfied as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, and that becomes...
That's this rewards, this accountability rewards thing you're talking about.
It's really a tough
way to keep your employees there.
It's a tough thing to do. So, you know, a lot of, you know, human behavior, you know, kinds of things, and why people react. You know, that's what guest service management, you know, we study, you know, the guest and how we can relate to the guest.
So do you talk to psychology people about human behavior and these kind of things, or?
Not, you mean like in our psychology department or something like that?
Yeah,
we look at the literature.
Okay.
I mean, you know, we go back to Maslow and you know, the hierarchy of needs, and Locke, and you know those kinds of things. We work with org behavior people, Gary Latham, in the College of Business, and you know, work with those kinds of folks. Yeah.
Okay.
But you know, not the clinical, you know, psychology, more the OB.
But to understand, you say you definitely need to understand human behavior to solve these problems. So
you know, why do guests react the way they react? You know, so the whole study of what we call guestology. You know, but
the study of the guest. The
study of the guest wants, needs, and behaviors.
Okay.
You know, why do they? And it's really not that hard to figure out. You know, why does somebody come to Orlando? You know,
ride roller
mostly to go to the theme parks.
Yeah.
You know, or to go to a convention.
Okay.
You know, 25, 30 years ago it was come to the theme parks. You know, now we've become a huge convention destination. So, you know, those are probably the two major reasons that, you know, people are coming. And we had, what, 50-some million visitors last year?
Right.
You know, come to Orlando. You know, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's a lot of people.
You know, the whole country of Spain only had 56 million. So,
yeah.
You know, that many are coming here. So,
all right.
You know, why are they coming? Well, you know, Mickey, Shamu,
Sunshine.
Universal,
yeah.
You know, Gatorland, you know, the convention center.
Yeah.
You know, those are the big draws.
Yeah.
You know, so how do we, you know, we have to figure out why they're coming, what they want, you know, what they're doing.
Yeah.
And, you know, work on that.
So do you think that your time in Germany prepared you somehow for what you're doing now?
My time in Germany was invaluable, and because it gave me a cultural, like you said.
Okay.
You know, your time at Surrey, you know, gave you an opportunity.
You learned about your own culture.
Learn about and how other people.
Yeah.
Not everybody thinks like Americans. You know, and that's probably a good thing. But
and it's really important for you to understand in your industry, because you've got a lot of people coming from all over the place too.
You know, and you know what makes people different, and why that's not a bad thing. And you know, and in our industry, you know, you can go to any of these big hotels, and you'll have, you know, 50 to 100 different nationalities working in the hotel.
Right.
And you know, so how do you know, we have many UNs in all these places, with, you know, so many countries represented in the workforce.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with people from different cultures, and you know, that didn't go to the schools, you know, that we didn't grow up on the same TV we grew up on.
Yeah.
And you know, how do you deal with that? So
yeah.
There's a cultural sensitivity that you've got to, you know, create.
Yeah.
That becomes important. So it's not just receiving guests, but you know, there's a different work ethic. You know, not all cultures have the same work ethic that we have.
Yeah.
So, you know, and that varies by part of the country too. And now, you know, we're seeing it, you know, in generations. You know, there's this whole cross-generational thing that we have to take a look at, because right now we have, you know, basically 5 generations in the workforce. We've never had that before.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
Yeah, we have people that were, you know, born before World War II, you know, still in the workforce. We have the baby boomers that are just starting to retire, but many of them won't retire because, you know, work is exciting for them. They're still able to work.
Yeah.
And then the Generation X, which is right behind them, is small, for the first time ever in history, is smaller than the previous generation.